What's up guys, Asian here again with another video, and today we're actually going to be talking about the Elsweyr chapter. So it's been a while since the ESO Live came out and they announced that Elsweyr was going to be the next chapter. It is widely been anticipated that it was either going to be Elsweyr or probably someplace in Skyrim, so I'm actually quite excited to see the homeland of the Khajiits. It's someplace that I've actually really wanted to see in like an actual Elder Scrolls game. So me personally, I'm very excited to see this chapter come out in June, or I should say late May, and actually get my hands in and into the lore. So this might actually spur me on to actually do some more questing in my time in ESO. Now, I did not feel like scrubbing through the entire live stream to get the important parts, so instead, just for the sake of convenience, I decided to go ahead and use Alcast's website. So Alcast does have pretty much everything that we currently know about the Elsweyr chapter and kind of any sort of DLCs that are kind of associated with it, all on his website. So I highly recommend checking this out if you guys want a more summarized view. If you guys want a more detailed view, then by all means go ahead and check out the ESO Live in the entirety of the stream there. But if you kind of want the quick and dirty, then this is what I would recommend you take a look at. So I have links down in the description below to both the entire ESO Live stream, as well as Alcast's website if you guys want to go ahead and read this for yourself at your own leisure. So first of all, the first thing that we're going to take note of is that they've actually said that the next 4 quarters, or rather this entire year, is going to be called the Season of the Dragon. So for those of you guys who aren't aware of how ZeniMax does these DLCs, they basically split it up into 4 quarters. The first quarter is usually some sort of dungeon DLC. The second quarter is the full-fledged expansion or chapter. So in the past it's been Morrowind, and most recently it's been Somerset. And then Q3 is usually another DLC zone. It's usually connected to the chapter in some way, shape, or form in terms of like kind of connecting the story together. So this would be something like a Murkmire or Clockwork City DLC. And then Q4 is normally what's called a quality of life improvement. So it's really focused in on kind of getting kind of fixing sort of quality of life stuff, as well as usually also another dungeon DLC. So you typically add 2 more dungeons. So for example, Horns of the Reach was one example of a kind of dungeon DLC that you might see as a Q3 or Q4 DLC. In one of those Q3 and Q4 DLCs is also going to be a general rebalance patch, so they typically go in and do a combat rebalance. Now in the past they've kind of done just very sweeping general patches, but they did say that they're going to take slower and more methodical steps now, so this is going to be their first year to kind of see how they actually take that rebalance. They also have removed or fired, or I'm not sure exactly what happened, but Roble is no longer part of the ESO combat team, so instead we have Wheeler instead. Brian Wheeler is now back on as the PvE combat rebalance, so we're going to see how that changes how they approach rebalancing PvE and PvP stuff. So Wheeler has already been doing PvP rebalance, so now he's also doing PvE, so we're going to be able to see whether or not that the sort of personnel change as well as the philosophy change is going to make any big difference in how the balances come about on each of these 4 different quarters. Now with the Elsweyr chapter, we are getting the Necromancer class, so he actually put it all on his own separate page, so we're going to hop over there right now. So what we know right now are really only very bare bones stuff. So we have kind of the concept arts for most, if not all, of the class skills, and we also have the 3 different class skill trees and their descriptions, but beyond that we don't really know anything else too much about the Necromancer. So this is a new class, so I'm kind of really excited to see where people are going to bring the Necromancer, kind of what role it's going to fit in. Obviously, like all the other classes in the game, you can do all 3 roles: damage dealer, healer, and tank as a Necromancer, but I'm particularly interested in how they're going to be as tanks, but DPS and healing should also be fairly interesting to see where they end up falling in the meta. So the 3 class skill trees. So these are the 3 trees that you get as a class. The first one is Reaper, and the second one is Bone Tyrant, and the third one is Living Death. So based on the descriptions here, it does seem like you have 1 for damage, 1 for tank, and 1 for healer. So Reaper, imbue the dead with frost, fire, and lightning to bring ruin upon your enemies. Bone Tyrant, bend and break the dead to your will and use their remains to create impenetrable barriers and extend your own life. Living Death, draw from the power of life and death to replenish and restore your allies. So you can can clearly tell that they're going with this is a damage line, this is a tank line, and this is a healer line. Very similar to the Wardens, where you have the Animal Companions line, the Green Balance line, and then you had the Frost line. So again, DPS, healer, tank. So it seems like they're taking kind of steps very similar to Wardens in how they're kind of classifying each of these 3 different trees here. So one of the things that people were a little bit concerned about with the Necromancer class was whether or not it'd basically be a Sork 2.0, whether they'd basically have a bunch of different undead pets still, like the Scamp for instance. Zos did say that the summons are here more of a temporary fire and forget thing, so we'll probably not see summoned pets like the Volatile Familiar or the Matriarch or the Bear. These are probably going to be more like the, I'm blanking on the set, but it's probably going to be very similar to the Defiler set, where you have like a summon a pet and it just kind of goes out, does its thing, and then disappears. You don't have to necessarily worry about it or not. So these are the names of each of the, so we have 5 active abilities and we have the ultimate abilities. Those are the abilities that we know for each of the 3 different skill trees. We know the names, but we don't know what they actually are. We do have concept art kind of showing kind of what these skills should be looking like when they hit the PTS. So for the Reaper, this is the DPS line. We have Burning, Summon Skeletal Mage, Skeleton Bomber, Graveyard, Siphon Energy, and Bone Dragon Breath. So just these is the kind of concept art that we see. So Burning Skull does just kind of seem like, you know, you're cutting dive, just your basic class spammable. Summon Skeletal Mage, this is going to be a little bit kind of, I'm not 100% sure what this looks like. It looks like it's a summonable very similar to like the Volatile Familiar or the Matriarch under the Sork skill tree, but they did say it's going to be more temporary, so we're not 100% certain whether this is going to be permanent or temporary. Skeleton Bomber, this is obviously going to be a temporary thing. This looks very similar to a Shulk, so it would be interesting to see what their morphs are going to be like and how it's going to play out in PvP. I'm just thinking, for instance, you have a bunch of Necromancers sending a bunch of Bombers in, that one of the morphs maybe is like a knockback or some sort of soft CC that you can stack. I can see that being very, very annoying in PvP, especially when you are when you're in a Zerg just spamming this. It would make for a very good counter Zerg play for like small scale, like if you're like, you know, if you're 3 versus Zerg kind of thing. But I don't really PvP enough to know whether adding soft CC to Skeleton Bomber morph would actually be pretty detrimental in PvP. Graveyard, this seems like an AoE, very similar to Winter's Revenge for a Warden. Siphon Energy, this one seems a little bit weird. I'm not 100% certain what this looks like. This looks like some sort of channeled ability where you it might be like the Overload, like heavy attack channel, perhaps, where you're just dealing constant damage as long as you're channeling the ability and it uses up magicka, perhaps. So I'm not 100% certain what this is going to be like. It's definitely going to be a challenge ability. I can't see this like not being a challenge ability. Can't see this being instant cast. So it'll be interesting to see how this plays out. In the Bone Dragon Breath, this is the ultimate, as we can clearly tell, so this will be interesting to see how this stacks up to other ultimates, particularly the Elemental Rage ultimate as an AoE. If this has a nice cleave, then this might end up replacing the Desher ulti for Necromancers. The Bone Tyrant skill tree. So this is the tanking skill set. So these should all be kind of based around survivability and tanking. So we have Bone Fetish. So just to be clear here, fetish here is not kind of referring to sexual fetish. Fetish is actually something for a totem. So this is basically think of as a bone totem. Taste of Life, Impaling Spikes, Bone Armor Consume, and Bone Colossus Transformation. So Bone Fetish seems like it places either like a totem down and you get a buff from it. At least that's what it seems like. Taste of Life, this looks like probably similar to the Vampire's Drained Essence. Perhaps it deals damage and you siphon life out. Again, it looks like it's probably going to be like a challenge ability, but like very similar to Drained Essence from the Vampire skill tree, but it might be instant cast. We'll have to wait and see when it hits the PTS. Impaling Spikes, this just looks like your typical CC, very similar to the ice ability on the Wardens and maybe Talons as well. Bone Armor, this is probably your typical Major Ward, Major Resolve. Consume, I'm not 100% certain what this looks like. This looks very similar to like the Templar's Repentance, where you basically, where every dead body you gain health and stamina back. So this might be like the Templar version of Repentance, which might be very useful for tanks, especially on ad pull fights, as a very quick way to kind of regenerate your resources, perhaps. Then Bone Colossus Transformation, this is going to be very interesting to see. So this kind of looks like a Dragonite magma armor combined with like Storm Antronac, except it's on yourself. So maybe this is going to be more like Magma Shell, where you basically reduce damage down to only 3% max per hit. Maybe it's probably going to be weaker, perhaps, maybe, in order to not diminish the magma armor, magma shell. So it'll be interesting to see where the Bone Colossus transformation falls. It also might be interesting to see how this plays out in PvP as well. If it deals decent damage as a tank, then it might be worth running this as a Necromancer tank in like small scale battlegrounds or something like that. I'm not sure. People who PvP more often might have some better ideas on how to use this if this does end up being looks like it can deal some decent damage again. So we'll actually have to see how this plays out. Finally, we have the Living Death skill tree. This is the healing skill tree. So these are all going to be kind of centered around healing and, you know, buffing your enemies, things like, or buffing your allies, I should say. We have Mend Flesh, Summon Skeletal Mender, Restoring Tether, Release Essence, Consume Curse, and Resurrect. So Mend Flesh, this looks like an AoE heal, very similar to Healing Springs or Budding Siege from the Warden skill tree. Summon Skeletal Mender, so again, this is going to be a little bit strange because they did say that pets are going to be more temporary, not permanent. So this might be something like the Netch, except instead of healing, like restoring resources to you, so like Blue Betty will restore Magicka for the Warden, this might just be kind of a Netch version of a heal on a specific person instead. So maybe you target a person and the Skeletal Mender heals them over 10 seconds for X amount of health or something like that. That's what I can potentially see this skill doing. Restoring Tether, this looks like the art looks like it's the Vine skill from Tethering Vines. I'm blanking on the name. It looks like the Vine skill from the Warden skill tree, but instead of actually like vining over to somebody, it looks like you're just kind of shooting out a healing beam perhaps, and you're hitting people. So maybe it's just like you shoot out a beam and it just heals whoever gets hit by the beam perhaps. Release Essence, this looks like an AoE heal, but it might also be an AoE buff skill. So we'll have to see kind of what that ends up kind of looking like, whether that's a kind of a buff or a heal. I'm assuming by Release Essence, the name of the skill, it looks like it could be more of an AoE buff skill. So it'll be interesting to see what kind of buff it actually provides, whether it's a named buff like Minor Ward or Minor Resolve, or it's going to be a unique buff. Consume Curse, this one I'm not 100% sure what it seems like. It looks like you're cleansing curse off yourself and maybe eating it, like consuming it for extra energy perhaps. So maybe this is kind of like a cleansing, a self-cleanse perhaps, or maybe it's like a self-buff skill where if you have a debuff on you, maybe it cleanses the debuff and gives you a buff instead. So this will be interesting to see kind of what this plays out as. And then Resurrect, this very clearly looks like an instant res skill, just from the name of the skill and the animation. It looks like you just target an area and you basically, might be a cast time associated, might be a channel time. I can't see a mass AoE res actually being implemented in this game. That would be absolutely game breaking for PvE and PvP, but Zos has done crazy things before, so it'd be interesting to see. I can't see this having some sort of downside, like a long channel time or a long cast time that can be interrupted or something like that. So again, we'll have to wait and see what each of these different skills look like and what they play out to be, but I am fairly excited to see kind of what all these will end up doing. So this is just art for the Bone Colossus transformation. And then that's pretty much it for the Necromancer skill class. So again, just based on this art, it does seem like there are some interesting abilities here, and I would like to wait and see what happened on the PTS and kind of where the Necromancer falls in line with the other 5 existing classes in terms of how they fit into each of the 3 different current roles. Back to the Elsweyr kind of information page. So Year of the Dragon, going to be a lot of dragons here. I was told that I didn't watch the entire stream, ESO live stream where they announced this, but it does seem like they do have a lore-friendly version, like explanation behind why dragons are in Elsweyr. So we'll see what that lore is. The zone itself, this is just kind of images of Elsweyr. So as you guys might know, Elsweyr is the homeland of the Khajiit, so it's kind of described as kind of like deserty, a lot of ruins, not as deserty as the Al-Kir desert. It's kind of more I mean, if you guys can see here, there's obviously some greenery here, so it's not quite as desolate as the Alahir Desert is. Benkarai, for instance, kind of comes to mind here, where you kind of have the crags, you kind of have like the deserty areas here, but you also have some vegetation here and there, so it's not completely lifeless at all. So Alfiq, so these are kind of new Khajiit NPCs. So actually, if you guys don't know that much about the Khajiit lore, Khajiits actually have different forms that they take. If we go over to the UESP lore page for the Khajiits, they actually have different forms that they take. So you have Senj, for instance, you have the Cathay, you have the Omsrat, so you have a lot of different forms of Khajiit here. So the Alfiq here basically are described as being very similar to house cats. So if you go ahead and take a look here, clearly they look like your typical house cats that you might have around at your home or your friend might have. And then you also have the Alfiq Rat. So Rat is, in the Khajiiti terms, basically means larger, so it might just be a larger house cat. We're not 100% certain kind of what this all means, but you do have a lot of different forms of Khajiits. So there are a total of 16 different forms of Khajiits, so it'll be interesting to see whether, or I should say, if you include the main, it is actually 17 forms, but there's only ever one main at a time. So we'll have a lot of potential options here. We might see all these, maybe not all 16 different forms of the Khajiit, but plenty of the Khajiits are going to be, hopefully be kind of highlighted in Elsweyr. So I believe, let me see if I can find 100% sure what Khajiit race normally are in the ESO games. So let me see, I believe it is, I don't want to say it is to say, really hard to tell just because they haven't really been specific as to what sort of Khajiit sub-race you are in the game, but you can see here there's a lot of different versions of the Khajiits here, so it'll be interesting to see whether they introduce any of these or all of these in Elsweyr. So there is a new trial that's coming out with Elsweyr. It's called Sunspire, so it's a full trial. So they did kind of describe it as very similar to Maul of Larkaj, where you actually have trash ads between the bosses, and there have, you know, different bosses, so it's not going to be like Asylum or Cloud Rest where you walk in, you can instantly go straight to the first boss. You actually have to fight through your way through a series of bosses to get to that final boss. They also did mention that each boss will have their own hard mode. So if there's, we don't know how many bosses there are going to be, but if there's 4 bosses, then we have 4 hard modes. So this is going to be very interesting to see, especially from a progression standpoint, whether how long it's going to take for us to clear it. And whether there's obviously going to be an achievement for clearing all the bosses on hard mode, and it's going to be interesting to see whether the skin comes from clearing it on just hard mode the last boss, or you have to clear all the bosses on hard mode. We'll have to see how the hard modes are activated, whether it's boring old read the scroll, boss hits harder, has more health, or if it's going to be you need to do certain mechanics in order to get the hard mode achievement. Hopefully it's going to be the latter, where you have to do some sort of special mechanic in order to get the hard mode achievement. So we'll have to wait and see when it gets released on the PTS, kind of what these hard modes are like. Hopefully they don't go the lazy route and just go read the scroll, there you go, hard mode. I want to see them actually introduce or have us do the mechanics to get that hard mode achievement. That's what makes ESO fun. We are going to be fighting dragons, so they did say the kind of setting for this is basically they took over a temple of Alkosh. So Alkosh, if you guys aren't aware, is basically the Khajiit form of Akatosh, which is the dragon god of time. So makes sense that the dragons decided to take over the temple of Alkosh, and now we basically need to go in and kill the dragons to reclaim the temple. And then obviously there's the pre-order bonus. Now the first DLC that's going to be released is going to be called Wrathstone, and this is going to be just at dungeons, as well as this is the DLC where you saw the racial passive changes. So there's going to be a few quality of life updates that they did mention, as well as the racial changes. So we are going to see some balancing changes as well in this DLC. Quality of life changes that they did mention that they want to introduce are going to be more character slots, so everybody's going to get 1 additional character slot for free, and then they're also kind of deciding how many additional character slots they're going to give us. So that brings the character slots up to 16 if you have all of them. If you don't buy any of the additional character slots, I believe you get 9 now. You have 8-bit default plus the 1 for free is 9. They did confirm that champion point increase, the cap will no longer be increasing. So they do want to take a look at CPs and kind of readjust them, which is good because power creep, especially in PvP, less so for PvE, power creep there is a small result due to the continuing increase of champion points. So to kind of give you guys some context here, when Morrowind was released about a year and a half ago, the CP cap was, I believe, only 660. Now it's 810. So quite a lot of increase there. So hopefully they'll be able to kind of rebalance it or introduce a new system that doesn't really play that much power creep. Again, this is much more of an issue in PvP and CP enabled PvP. You do see power creep in PvE due to champion points because now we're able to put more points into penetration or other damage increasing passives. So it is nice to see that they have recognized that the continual increase in the CP cap is an issue to power creep. So I'm interested in seeing how they're going to kind of rebalance this. Obviously, we've already went over the racial passive changes. Now, these next two are going to be more for PvP, and I'm not really going to put any opinions on them. I'm just going to kind of describe them. So they did mention that Cyrodiil will now get artifacts when Elsweyr is released. So they announced that Volendrug will make it into the game. So it's a unique weapon existing once per campaign, and the person that picks it up will transform into something and have special skills. It does seem like this is basically kind of like power-ups in Cyrodiil. So again, I'm not sure what this is all going to mean for PvP in Cyrodiil. This might just kind of be like counterplay for like a dominating faction. Maybe the Emperor is like kicking your ass and you kind of need a way to kind of, you know, kick back so you have an artifact or something. I don't know. That's what it seems like it is to me. I'm not 100% certain or what it sounds like. They did mention that the Imperial City will finally be separated from Cyrodiil, so you'll be able to queue into the Imperial City by itself. You no longer need to queue into Cyrodiil to get into the Imperial City now. So that'll be nice to see there. They are adding a guild search function. They're adding a dedicated built-in search function for guild traders, so now you don't have to get Awesome Guild Store to kind of search things. It'll be interesting to see whether Master Merchant, for instance, is going to be integrated into this. So for example, Awesome Guild Store right now, it automatically integrates Master Merchant into there, so you'll be able to see how good of a deal you're getting when you're buying something. So hopefully Master Merchant will be able to integrate a similar feature into this sort of search menu here. The guild search is going to be interesting, so now you can easily search for a guild rather than having to go through Reddit or the forums. And then a zone guide, so this is going to be more for newer players, this will kind of give you a little bit of an idea of what you need to do in a specific zone. Obviously, they have different editions of Elsweyr and all this stuff. So a lot of stuff that are coming in, a lot of very nice quality of life stuff, especially that search bar, that guild trader search menu. Don't have to install any add-ons now. It can be very nice for console players, so you can actually legitimately search for things like that. So they didn't mention when this is going to be coming out. Hopefully it's going to be coming out in Q1, but most likely it'll be coming out in Elsweyr. The artifacts, this should be interesting to see how this plays out in PvP, whether this is going to make or break Cyrodiil. Again, I don't PvP enough to really know how this is going to go. Champion points no longer increasing is a great step forward in terms of trying to rebalance the game. Racial passives, again, we're going to have to wait and see what's going to happen in Wrathstone. And then, of course, the trial is going to be really exciting. It's going to be really exciting to see how all these hard modes are going to be playing out. It's going to be very exciting for me as a progression raider to kind of progress through the trial itself and through all the different hard modes. It's going to be very similar, I think, to Cloud Rest for Mayflower, where we're going to be spending a lot of time in Sunspire. And then, of course, the new class itself, Necromancers. I'm personally very excited to see where they fall in line in terms of tanking, but I like to see where they also fall in line for healing, especially for and DPS. It'll be interesting to see whether they kind of go the same route as Wardens, where they're kind of really good but not the best, or they're going to be kind of take over the meta, so to speak. They're going to become the top in DPS or healer or tank. Again, this is talking more for PvE perspective. PvP, again, I'm not 100% sure what it's going to be like, but again, it'll be very interesting to see where the Necromancer fits into the existing balance in the game. So that is pretty much all we know about Elsweyr right now. As more information comes out, of course, we will continue to update, release new videos, kind of talking about things like that. Remember to keep an eye on Outcast. He does a very good job at summarizing all this information from the stream into very condensable, very condensed, very easy to digest form. Again, links in the description below to his website. And if you guys kind of want the quick and dirty version, again, I will also have a link down for the ESO live stream if you guys want to watch that in its entirety and get all the juicy details. So hopefully you guys found this video informative. Again, as more information comes out, especially with the PTS, we will be releasing more videos, or I should say I will be releasing more videos. Of course, very similar to Somerset and Morrowind, there will likely be an NDA on any sort of quest stuff, main quest stuff from Elsweyr. Hopefully that will not impact trials or things like that, or any sort of class testing, rebalance testing that I can do. So hopefully I'll be able to show you videos of that when Elsweyr does come under the PTS, probably in early April. So be on the lookout for that in the next few months. So that is it for this video. Hopefully you guys found this informative, and I'll see you guys in the next dungeon.